So, your life sucks. Every day is the same. You wake up, eat some breakfast, brush your teeth, go to work, stay there for 8 hours, go home again, eat some dinner, watch a TV show, get ready for bed, and you go to sleep. And the next day will be exactly the same. 5 days a week for the next month, the next year, and the next decennium. Until you eventually reach the age at which you're not useful enough for society anymore, and you'll retire. You might travel a bit, spend some time with your grandchildren if you have them, but before you know it, your light will go out. Your family and friends will say their goodbyes, you'll be put beneath the ground, and everything will have been for nothing. Conclusion, life is completely and utterly meaningless. So, let's have some fun while we're at it, won't we? When Gerard Reve published his debut novel called The Evenings in 1947, it was heavily criticized by many. After the war, people were looking for some lighthearted relief, but Reve's somber novel didn't offer any. In a review, a Dutch author wrote the following: "I have rarely read a book so bleak, so devoid of any positivity, so grey, cynical, and utterly negative as this one. It chokes you." Famous Dutch author Neskio even called it a non-book once. In any case, people found that the novel offered no outlook for the bleak existence of the post-war generation. But eventually the novel grew out to be the Bible of this new generation. It's still being regarded as one of the most important novels after the war, and only recently got translated into English by Sam Garrett. And yes, at first glance, The Evenings is a very bleak novel. The so-called hero of the novel is Frits van Egters, a 23-year-old office worker. In his own words, his job is nothing more than taking cards out of a file, and once he's taken them out, putting them back in again. Frits is a daydreamer and a teller of inappropriate jokes. He finds life absurd and inexplicable. He lives with his parents, who drive him completely insane. On top of all that, he also has disturbing dreams about death and destruction. We follow Frits through the last 10 days of the year 1946. As you might have presumed from the novel's title, we don't see much of the days and mostly follow the evenings. Frits visits friends and family, bickers with his parents, aimlessly wanders around the city, and tries to make sense of the meaningless world around him. He seems to have an obsession with death, sickness, and baldness, and doesn't hesitate to bring those subjects up during conversation, much to the annoyance of his company. When people read the novel today, the biggest reason why they don't like it or found it boring is that the novel doesn't seem to have a story. It doesn't go anywhere. And yes, fair enough, there is no real story. It's just depressing day after depressing day after depressing day. But since I always kept on reading and had fun while reading as well, even though the novel seemed so bleak, pointless, and devoid of hope, I think that that's precisely what this novel is all about. And that's where the finding joy part comes in. Albert Camus, one of the most famous absurdists of the 20th century, once said that the only serious philosophical problem is suicide. He wondered why, if life is really all that meaningless, we all don't just kill ourselves. And yet, we don't. With Frits, you might wonder the same. If all his evenings are really that numbing, and all he can think about is death and sickness, wouldn't it just be better to end it all? And yet, he doesn't. For Camus, the meaning of life could be found in the reasons why we don't commit suicide. Camus himself found this meaning of life in its absurdities. Instead of moaning about life's meaninglessness, he laughed at it and found joy in it, which in itself gave it meaning. This is exactly what Frits does too, without him even realizing it. For one, he loves to talk about baldness and sickness, even though he doesn't know why. When he visits a friend, it doesn't take long for him to say the following: "By now, of course, it has been demonstrated beyond a shadow of doubt," Frits said, "that you do not inhabit a sound body. One suspects a family with a great many hematological disorders. Describe, if you would, the symptoms anew." How can I say things like this? He thought. Why can't I make it stop? So it seems to be some kind of subconscious decision to keep talking about baldness and sickness. He doesn't seem to be able to stop, even when it's clear that the people around him are mostly repulsed by it. When the conversation at someone's house comes to cancer, Frits doesn't take long to jump in. "It's quite a marvelous disease," he continued. I have read fascinating things about it. It's a parasitic cell. It appears out of nowhere and never stops growing. Right through everything. From one organ to the next. Straight through the intestines. Gruesome, incurable, grand. How can you talk like that? Said Auntie Steen, shaking her head. It would seem that Frits just takes pleasure in those gruesome subjects, and likes to provoke the people around him, to get them to react. That also seems to be the case when his brother visits, and Frits starts about his baldness. Oh, but you are becoming quite bald, Frits said. Joop did not reply. Listen, Joop, he started again. Without meaning to be nasty, your scalp is really almost bare. It will not be long before you can count your hairs on the fingers on one hand. Joop smiled, keeping his lips pursed. It's not just the case with sickness either. Sometimes Frits is just downright mean to his so-called friends. When a group of friends decide to go to the movies and one friend ends up without a ticket, Frits says to his face, I can't imagine anything more dreadful. Going to visit someone who has a ticket for a film or the theater, and then walking along with them, and then staying outside, alone. Don't you think? Yes, Louis said. At one point, Frits basically calls someone he just met dumb as bricks. You seem to me to be a bit of a dolt, he said. Wholesome did not reply. I am not saying this to be hateful, don't misunderstand me, Frits went on. It is a matter of sincerity. You just happen to have, as I have noticed, limited intellectual faculties. So that's where Frits finds his joy, in trying to provoke the people around him to react to his own absurd behavior. But that's not everything. Frits also has a thing with control, and mostly controlling people by manipulating them and lying to them. There is one character in particular that Frits loves to manipulate and control. Maurits. Maurits is younger than Frits and seems to have some criminal tendencies. At one point, a man named Lande comes to Frits's house, saying that money has been stolen from him. He suspects Maurits and asks him if Frits thinks Maurits could be capable of stealing from him. Yes, Frits said. I think he is quite capable of that. I think he is capable of much more too, and they also know a great deal more. What is it then? Asked Lande. I am not going to tell you, but I urge you to stick to your guts. He has that 200 guilders, and he must give it back. Later, when he runs into Maurits, he accuses Frits of saying those things about him. She said that you had said that I had a criminal bent, that you knew much more, and that you considered me capable of anything. That's no way to talk, damn it. I never, Frits said. And you know very well that I am not the kind of person who says, I know much more than that. I am not the kind of gas bag who would say something like that. So, not only does he manipulate and control Lande by telling him he knows more than what he's telling him, but he's also manipulating Maurits. And Maurits is someone who is very easily manipulated, because he seems to look up to Frits. He constantly asks him what Frits thinks about him, and Frits gives him advice, which Maurits greedily accepts. But he also has his doubts. I've been thinking about what you said about those spectacles, Maurits said, but I never know whether you are pulling my leg. I can never figure that out. Even as a reader, you can't be entirely sure if Frits is serious to Maurits, but that's part of the genius of this novel and part of Frits's pleasure. In any case, Frits is able to easily wind Maurits up, and he makes him say things that he probably should have kept to himself, like in the next scene. We are here at the microphone, dear listeners, said Frits in his squawky voice, in the study of Mr. Maurits Duivenis, the celebrated blabbermouth. Mr. Duivenis, could we ask you a few questions? Does this anger you? He asked then, in a normal voice. Who would you choose as your victim? Frits asked. Age, gender, and nature of bodily harm, please do tell. I'd like to strangle little boys in the woods, Maurits said slowly. Simple as that. In this example, we also see Frits trying to provoke Maurits when he asks him if his interviewing style is angering him. So it really seems like Frits enjoys provoking, controlling, and manipulating people. Another thing Frits loves doing is messing with his parents. He lives with them but doesn't seem to get along with them too well. They never seem to be on the same page, even when it comes to something as dumb as what is on the radio. "Can't you turn off that noise?" his father asked, sitting up. "No," said Frits. "You should try listening. Then you would hear that it is not incoherent noise. The orchestra provides the rhythm, the saxophone plays the melody and the improvisations." "But it doesn't have to be that loud," the man said, turning down the volume. Then he lay back down. Frits took the knob between his fingers and turned it up slowly again, bit by bit, at those points where only a soft drum beat could be heard. On the last day of the novel, Frits is in his room. When his mother calls him, he pretends not to hear. "Frits," his mother shouted. "Ah, yes," he said to himself. "One more time." "Frits," she shouted again. "That's twice," he thought, "but I didn't hear. One must not forget I am hard of hearing." "Frits, where are you?" she called out. "That is thrice," he said to himself. "But the fourth time I will certainly hear." It's those little things that Frits finds joyful, even though he is the only one who is in on the joke. So, yes, Frits struggles to get to the end of the day, and life does seem to be devoid of meaning, but still he tries to have fun along the way, albeit in a very nihilistic and somewhat sadistic way. And I am definitely not saying that you should start provoking, controlling, and manipulating everyone around you, because that's just Fritz's way of dealing with things. I am saying that you should try to find joy in the little absurdities of this weird but beautiful life. Have some fun along the way, even if you're the only one who is in on the joke and the rest thinks you're a complete nutter. The end of the novel is strangely hopeful, so I want to end with that too. In my opinion, it's one of the most beautiful endings to any book ever. So here goes. "I live," he whispered. "I breathe, and I move. I breathe, I move, therefore I live. What could possibly happen? Calamities, pains, and horrors may come, but I live. I can be confined or visited by gruesome diseases, but still I breathe and I move, and I live. Whatever ordeals are yet to come, I am alive." Drawing his lungs full of air, he climbed into bed. "It has been seen," he murmured. "It has not gone unnoticed." He stretched himself out and fell into a deep sleep. Maybe that should just be our goal. To laugh at the absurdities of this empty world devoid of meaning and to have not gone unnoticed, even if it is only for ourselves.